بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad وآله الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Perspective. We are looking at literature, the perspective, the Islamic perspective in regards to literature, and we talked about that how every writing is based upon or inspired from the Quran. Now, when we look at, or the speech, for example, is inspired from the Quran, and that is why you tend to see that every speaker tends to begin by Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's how the Quran begins, and every speaker, maybe he might be talking about, I don't know, something that he's presenting in a medical field, but if he's a Muslim, his speech and his talk will not begin without Bismillah. Now, Najul Balagha, it's one of the peak of eloquence, is one of the example that how Imam Ali alayhi salam spoke, how he wrote the letters that is reflecting the Quran. His speech and his writing is reflecting that, you see. Now, when a writer writes, when a speaker speaks, whether that be a letter, whether that be a sermon, that in terms of his eloquency, that weight should be equal or should be inspired from the Quran. His Quran is very eloquent. It's very poetic. It's very beautifully, revealed to the Prophet from the divine. Now, if I want to write something, my writing should have similar or style or weight. And we see that in the literature, in the Islamic literature, such as hadith of the prophets and the imams. As the Quran takes man from the arsh to farsh, the hadith also must take the man from arsh to farsh. As the Quran educates, teaches, upbrings, do tarbiyat, purifies, the hadith, the Najul Balagha must also do the same thing. The writer and the books and the poet, they should write in a similar fashion. I mean, if you look at the tradition of supplication and the du'as, Sayf Sajjadiyah of the fourth Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, which is one of the masterpiece, and how these du'as, they tend to really, take you from this world to the divine. Just as the Quran. Now, this book of the supplication of the, grandson of Amir al-Mu'mineen is fascinating. It's known to be the Psalms of the family of the Prophet, or is known as the Zabur al Muhammad or Injil al Muhammad, the Sayf Sajjadi of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Then you go further, you have the writers, the Islamic writers and the scholars. There's a great field of poets, and see, Quran is very poetic, and you would find every scholar trying to get involved with some style of poetic literature. He's a scholar in philosophy. He's a scholar in Arabic language, but he would write his philosophy in a poetic way. He would write the Arabic grammar book in the poetic way. Those who are familiar with the Arabic grammar text, they would find that. For example, Sharh Ibn Aqil. Ibn Aqil, a great Arabic linguist, he wrote the Sharh Ibn Aqil. He writes a poem and then he explains that. The poem is in regards to the Arabic grammar laws, but he writes in a poetic way. For example, Mullah Hadi Sabzawari, Sharh Manzuma, which is a philosophy text, which is a philosophical text, is a text on philosophy. It is teaching you philosophy, but he wrote philosophy in a poetic fashion. So he writes a line of poetry, and then he explains this poetry in the commentary. He's talking about philosophy. He's talking about wujud. He's introducing the wujud, but he has written it in a form of a poem. Mystical theories written by Ibn Arabi or written by other scholars. Sohrawardi, when he writes treatise, he writes in a poem, and then after he finishes writing this poem, he explains that what this poem is talking about, his mystical arguments. So see, it is not only the purpose, it's not only what it is talking about, the poem or the literature. It's talking about God, it's talking about wujud, it's talking about education. It is educating others, it's providing light to others, which the Quran is doing. Whether that be providing light in the field of Arabic grammar, whether that be providing light in the field of chemistry or mathematics, for example, the purpose is that, right? It is educating, just how the Quran is. But even the style, the outward style is poetic, right? Then, and in Arabic, like I said, they wrote in Arabic. Now, you would find when Islam, after the 4th century, you would find the works of Firdausi, which is known as the Shahnameh, the book of kings, for example, right? Which is the national epic of Persia. And it's the religious and mystical poetry that is associated to the other mystical and poetry associated with Rumi, with Attar and Neshapuri, with Hafiz, right? All of these things, this poetry, it all have the element of latafat, which is that subtle, latif nature which the Quran have. And even the purpose of this writing, it is really taking you, this literature is taking you from arsh to farsh, from farsh to arsh. It's taking you from this worldly sort of worldly, dunyavi, madde, matter, towards the divine. One poetry of Saadi, sometimes, for me, a person who is unaware of the divine hidden mysteries of the Quran and doesn't have the knowledge of Arabic, but me being a Persian, for example, have that knowledge of Persian art or Persian sort of poetry, the Persian poetry of a Hafiz or of a Rumi or of, for example, Saadi will change me, will have that effect, because this poetry is inspired from the Quran, so it is somehow making me connect to the Quran. It is somehow giving me the message, the same message of the Quran in my language, in my culture, and it is affecting me, right? So the literature, the Islamic literature, the Islamic perspective or the spiritual perspective of the literature within Islam would be of this fashion. Turkish poetry, for example, Turkish writer, for example, you have the figures of Ahmad Yasawi, you have Yunus Emre, for instance, these great poets, the same way. Then as it goes into Punjabi, Kashmiri, Urdu, Sindhi, Gujarati, all of these different Urdu poems and poets, when they write, for example, they all tend to have the same sort of effect in literature. Then this literature gets more, how shall I say, more artistic, other than the writings and educating, and becomes more artistic, and it becomes the calligraphy, the writings. For example, you have the Kufi script, then you have the Nasqi, then you have the Thuluth, then the Muhaqqiq, Rehani and Nastali, all of the different types of calligraphies that is seen. And it is through these calligraphies when the man reflects, or when the man is involved in doing this. He's writing Nastali. When he's writing this Nastali, right? When he's writing this Nastali, he is writing it with all his dedication. And this dedication and this words and verses that he is writing is providing him that feeling of spirituality. It's providing him with tranquility and peace. That is bringing to his heart, and that is the purpose, right? Now, all in all, it is not just where a person writes wherever one wants to write, but it is also the question of of beauty, that the harmony, the symmetry, the balance, which is based upon the justice of God. Everything is in order. Nazm, the symmetry, preciseness, that has to be there in the writing, in the literature, in the artwork, once again reflecting the divinity of God. Now, as we move along, obviously a bit critical, you have the music, the traditional music. Traditional scholars, Ibn Sina, philosophers, they all have written on music as well. Now, there is indeed a difference of opinion in regards to the different types and forms of music and when it is used. But if you look at the traditional approach to the music, or the Persian music if you have it, or the Qawwali or the Sufi music that we tend to find, once again this is also trying to take you through this music, use this music, because music is part of art, and it is knowledge, and it is a science, and it just can't be haram as such, because it is a science. And yes, that music is haram, which will take you not towards God but towards shaitan, right? That type of music. Obviously I'm not here to discuss the Shari aspect of ghina, what ghina means, why it is haram, and I'm not discussing that. I know people might criticize me if they are listening to it. Oh, Maulana Sahib, you are making music halal. No, I'm not making music halal. I'm discussing music from the point of view of art and architecture, and what we see, music, and what we see how Muslims, they engage themselves with certain amount of music. Flute, Bishnu as nay, for example, Maulana Rumi is saying, the very first poem, Bishnu as nay, che hikayat mi kunat, I think as hikayat as judai mi kunat. I don't exactly remember the poem, but it's talking about listen from the flute. What is the flute playing? What is the flute saying? The flute is singing the song of separation, the separation of man from God, for example, when he came to this world, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. So the flute, the different instruments which are halal, which are not haram, like I said, I'm not discussing this from the point of view of halal and haram and which instrument is halal, which instrument is not halal, what is music. No, from the point of view of art. So you have this Persian music, Sufi music, and when it is played, it brings you peace. It brings you it calms you down. I'll give you an example. In Iran, for example, you will visit the nature, or you will visit, I don't know, a big garden. Now, sometimes the people who are there, or sometimes even they have loudspeakers in the garden, and sometimes they play the music there. But the music that they play is the Persian traditional music with ghazal, with poetry of Hafiz, of Rumi, of Saadi within it. Where, once again, we talked about poetry and how poetry and the ghazals and the words that they tend to take you towards remembrance of God. That is the main purpose of the art, right, and literature. So now you have this music as well being played. Now this music, it harmonizes with the atmosphere, right, with those trees, with that fountain, with that water that is flowing in the on your side, with that river that is flowing. If this music is played, it is not becoming a nuisance to that atmosphere. It is somehow harmonizing it. It is providing you, with something extra to ponder and to reflect. There's no doubt the natural nature without any instrument is a perfect vehicle for a person to connect to God, because there's music in the nature. When you are standing at the shore of the ocean, when the waves are coming, there is music being played there. The sound of the water, and every sound is different to the previous sound, right? And this sound is affecting your soul. While this water is coming, you have other, if you are far away from the city environment, the sounds of the polluted city, you have the birds chirping, you have this is music, and this is making your spirit fly towards God. So the same way, the traditional music, the Arabic traditional music, the Persian, the Turkish, they have the same effect upon the soul. And when it is played in a natural environment as well, it is compatible with it. It harmonizes it. But in the same if you go on a picnic and then you play a Western, hard rock, rap or something, it doesn't fit in that environment. There is some sort of repulsion. The nature is saying, what is this sound pollution here? But at least, once again I repeat twice, that traditional music is somehow harmonizes, with the nature. Because the purpose, the intention behind composing that music is to take the soul towards the divine. Marhum Muhammad Hassan Tabatabai, the brother of Allama Muhammad Hussain Tabatabai Sahib Mizan, he wrote a book on music. He wrote, because all scholars, they write poetry, like I said, they write treatises on music. Like I said, you will find Ibn Sina, you would find Nasir Khusro, you would find, for example, Muhammad Hassan Tabatabai. He wrote a book on music, and Allama Tabatabai, in an interview, I think it's in Mehr Taban, the book is Mehr Taban, in which he says that my brother wrote a book on music and he himself destroyed it because it was too dangerous. The reason of it was too dangerous that it could fall into the hands of someone who doesn't have a thorough understanding, and they might misuse this book, right? So he destroyed it. So music also as an art have that effect. And I think we will stop here and then we'll continue in our next program, the Islamic world in modern times, and we'll ponder or reflect on these things, inshallah, in our next program. Thank you for joining Perspectives, and we will see you next week. Goodbye from Hidayat tonight. Thank you.